Hey, everybody. We want to welcome you to another episode of the KLC Preaching Podcast. My name is Jared Alcántara, and I am Professor of Preaching and Director of the Kyle Lake Center for Effective Preaching at Baylor University's George W. Truett Theological Seminary. We're so glad that you've joined us today, and I want to welcome our guest, Dr. Irene Gallegos. Thank you so much for joining us.
Wonderful to be here.
Well, it's an honor to have you, so I'm going to make sure I get the title right. Director of Hunger Care Ministries for Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission. Did I do it?
That's it. You got
Okay,
it.
awesome. Well, we're really glad that you're here with us. Thankful that you could join us on the podcast today. Normally what we like to do is we like to just give our listeners and our viewers a chance to get to know our guests. And so usually we'll just ask them a little bit about their story. So let's start there. Tell us a little bit more about your story. And usually we'll ask our guests to talk a little bit about their conversion and their and when they experienced a call as well. So
yes.
Welcome to the podcast. Glad you could join us. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, not just what you do, but a little bit more about your story.
Yes, happy to. It's a joy. And thank you for having me here. And so I would say I grew up in a Christian home. And my mom was definitely a pillar of faith in our family. We were the family that during vacation Bible schools in the summer, we'd pack everyone into the van. You ask the cousins, you ask everybody to just come in. We're going to VBS. And so early on, age 10, is when through the stories and experiences of missionaries that I thought, how is it that people just dedicate their whole lives to the Lord? And so I grown up listening to Bible stories, knowing, going to church, having it in our home, the principles and values, and this missional lifestyle is what I thought, okay, I want to know more about this. And so at 10 years old, in the back of our van on the way to family trip down to San Antonio, went through this little booklet that they gave away at Vacation Bible School at the end. And on my own, went through the booklet and accepted the Lord as my Savior and didn't even tell anybody at the time. And I will say from that point on, just dove deep into reading the scriptures, studying, asking questions. And in middle school, I started actually leading Bible studies in my class, in my school, for Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And then in high school, asked at church if I could lead a middle school girls' Bible study. And then it just continued on from there. And so I will say, as far as a call, that's one of those, some people who grew up in the church may have a hard time pinpointing when their conversion was, when they came to know the Lord. Or I feel like the call for me is a hard time to pinpoint because it was one of those, I always felt like there was this tugging, this pressing of, I believe I am called to do this, but I didn't see it exemplified. It wasn't in front of me as far as someone who looked like me, female, Hispanic, in vocational ministry. And so I just always assumed that wherever the Lord had me, whatever field and career that I was in, I would just witness. I would be his example, his hands and feet, wherever he takes me, but didn't really understand a call or when that call was. And so when I started this role with Texas Baptist, I think that's when I started realizing, okay, wait, I've had this for a while and I've been doing this for a while, but just didn't really step fully into it until the opportunity came about.
In college, you start to fall in love with a particular, I won't give it all away, but you start to fall in love with a particular academic discipline, which then leads you to do a master's degree and a PhD. So you go to Dallas Baptist University, and talk to us a little bit about that phase in your life and where that took you.
Yes. So I was a biology pre-med student, and I really thought I was going to go to medical school. I thought this is it. And I had a professor, Dr. Curtis Lee, who said, Irene, I really think you should consider public health. And in my young adult arrogance, I took it as a thanks, but no thanks. This is where I'm headed. And so I stubbornly finished my biology degree, struggled through the natural sciences. But he saw it in me of, hey, Irene, I think this area of community health, behavioral health, the social sciences, this seems like it's more for you. And so when I graduated, I had no clue what I was going to do. I I took the MCAT to get into medical school, did terrible on it. And I was a Gates Millennium Scholar. So I had 10 years of higher education paid for me. I had 10-year scholarship and I could choose where I wanted to go. And one of the disciplines that they did promote and encourage was public health. And so I thought, you know what, let me just give this public health thing a chance. Like, let me look into it. And so I got in, truthfully, on probationary acceptance because my GPA was just terrible from undergrad. And first semester 4.0, I loved it. I fell in love. I went back to Dr. Lee and said, you were right. I said, I should have listened to you.
And it's the end of college. So this is the master's degree.
This
is
is
really
already,
where you're falling in love
yes.
with public health because someone else has identified that
Yes.
as gifting, calling, possibility for you.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
And so went into public health, absolutely loved it. Any graduate assistant position I could get, I was just trying to soak in and roll out, okay, God, where do you have me? What do you have for me? And so everything kind of landed within women's health. I did infant safe sleep. I did so many an array of different types of research studies. And that's where I landed mostly in interpersonal violence. And so I was focused on studies within rape crisis centers and domestic violence shelters. And that space is where I thought, this is where I love the healing. And this is where I can apply. It was not a faith-based institution. I didn't work at faith-based organizations. But my perspective, my biblical perspective is bringing now that into the work that I do and what I was called to do. And so clearly saw how the Lord used me in a lot of the relationships within my colleagues, but then also the community and the people that we were with. So yeah.
Yeah.
It
Now
was
your research. Sorry to interrupt. Your research takes you into this area of vicarious resilience, and so how people who work with those who are experiencing trauma can become vicariously resilient.
Yes.
So I was just thinking of all the connections with church work,
Yes.
and with pastors, and with ministry, and with preaching about trauma. Tell us a little bit more about vicarious resilience. That really struck me and just piqued my curiosity. So tell me
Yes.
more about what you learned.
So I had a fellow PhD student say, hey, there's this term, and I think a lot of what you're interested in falls along with this term, vicarious resilience. And I thought, I've never even heard of that. What is that? So the more I started looking into it, it aligned perfectly because at that point, I was at rape crisis centers, I was at domestic violence shelters, and had been in teen pregnancy centers and seen the social workers, different people who worked in trauma fields who had this level of resilience, people who were committed. And something I would ask people, how long, what's the tenure? And some say, we get people who last maybe only 6 months, but then it's overwhelming for them and they move to a different. There's a lot of turnover in social work in general.
Sure.
But then there's just an added layer of trauma. And so for these trauma workers, how do they cope? How do they adapt to the different traumas? And so you hear a lot about avoiding burnout, how to work through burnout and secondary trauma. And so what I tell people is, yes, those things exist. In addition to that, compassion fatigue, secondary trauma, burnout, in addition to that, there's another side of the coin. And that's where vicarious trauma, post-traumatic growth, compassion satisfaction, there's the positive view. And so when we take in these traumatic stories, we have the opportunity, and it's a natural human tendency to lean to the negative. I'm going to take on this sorrow. I'm going to take on this trauma myself. And so I now carry this weight on my shoulders.
The pain becomes our pain.
Yes.
Right.
And it's good. It's part of human connection.
Yeah.
In addition to that, so it's not an either or. It's not you can only experience burnout, you can only be resilient, or not one or the other. In addition to that burnout, then there's this level of resilience of, hey, you know what? I've actually really grown from the experiences here. I have a new level of adaptability. At one point, I really wrestled with my faith because how could God allow such evil to happen? But yet I grew to realize and understand a lot more about his compassion, about the bigger picture of who he is. And so there's a lot of wrestling that happens. And in that tension, there's a lot of growth that can happen. And so that's what I love about the resilience. And it goes back into, to me, the key in Romans when Paul's writing and there's this point where he says trials and tribulations produce perseverance, Romans 5. Perseverance produces character and character hope. And so oftentimes we stay in this, maybe we'll persevere through a trial, but then we let that, you know what, I got through it, great, end of story. But wait a minute. what about the character that it grew? What about how you're a different person now? And so that is what fascinates me. And so when we think about people in trauma-heavy fields, how is it that they have this tenure? How is it that they can be in this trauma-heavy field for so long? And so then transferring that now to the church, how is it pastors, ministers, lay leaders, whomever this may be, how can we hear and take on, maybe it's just traumas of the world, but especially as we're discipling, as we're working with people, as we're serving people, as we're evangelizing, how is it that we then take on these stories and yes, have the compassion, but continue and persevere and see how we can grow from the resilience that we see others. The resilient stories may not be as common as the traumatic stories, but yet those are the experiences that help us to then evaluate and say, you know what? I did learn from this person. As I walked alongside this person in their divorce, in their, with a son who stepped away from the Lord, whatever it may be, I walked alongside and I journeyed with this person. And just as I saw them develop in their trust and in their faith and in their perseverance, and it molded and shaped, God used those experiences to mold and shape their character. Then now, wait a minute, let me take a step back and look at me and what the Lord has taught me through this experience as well.
Wow. Yes. And that's just my mind goes so many different directions. I think about all our listeners, our viewers who've experienced church hurt, or they've had to lead through church hurt, and then had to walk alongside people who are going through very, very traumatic experiences related to death or suffering, and how that's not the end of the story. It doesn't have to be. That there's a chance for God to do something new, even in the wilderness or in the wasteland. It's wonderful.
It's fascinating that you mentioned that, Dr. Alcántara, because I studied this, again, not in a faith-based context.
You didn't even know that was next for you.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But how the Lord used it to prepare me. Because and after that, not only did I step into this role with Texas Baptist, but even in my local church, in my home church, stepped into a role of being on our leadership team. And we went through some rough wilderness seasons. And there were experiences where I did not even realize how the Lord was preparing me to say, hey, yes, you're thinking this is the circle that you were familiar with, and it was intentional. Now I need you to apply this in the church.
So little did you know your academic work
Yes.
would then shape the work that you do now in your church, and then also as the director of Hunger and Care Ministries. Talk to us a little bit more about that work that you're doing now. You started that work in 2022, if I'm correct. Tell us more about that ministry and what it entails, what work you're doing now, and how that's impacting Texas Baptist life, churches, and society in Texas and beyond.
Yes. So the Christian Life Commission, we seek to resource churches. And so we say our kind of North Star, what we focus on is do justice, love kindness, walk humbly. And so we are very active in advocacy work and helping to bring awareness to issues that we believe are important to God's heart. And so we are active in Austin, and it's nonpartisan. So we're not there to say right or left, one way or the other. We're saying, hey, this is an important issue that we see brought up in the scriptures, and we want you to be aware that House Bill, Senate Bill, such and such touches this topic. Now it's up to you to decide how you believe the Lord is leading you to advocate on that issue. So we're heavy in advocacy. And then I'm going to skip over the love part, ethics and justice. So what are these biblical perspectives? What are these gray areas? How do we navigate and understand when it comes to welcoming but not affirming an LGBTQ plus community? How do we navigate some of these issues in our current day? And so we have a director of ethics and justice as well, who helps and trains and leads a lot of churches through some of these gray area matters. So then the love kindness, that's the area that I oversee through our Hunger and Care Ministries, and that's really supporting the work at hand. And so a lot of our churches focus on what's formerly the benevolence ministries or social ministries. And so we have a lot of food pantries. We have some that have broken off and are a parachurch ministry now, and perhaps provide more comprehensive services. Beyond the food, they may do medical, dental, social services, something like that. And so what's fascinating is, again, coming from this different context, is being able to say, hey, I see that there's now some level of resilience training for ministers. what about our ministers and leaders who are in these social ministries? What about those who are in community ministries? And so that piqued my interest, and I brought that as a training to some of our the people who received from our grant and said, hey, would you be interested? Because you're ministering, you're here leading your community and showing up for your community, providing food. And in that, you get to hear a lot of the experiences, the hardships that people are enduring, why they're coming to get food. And so that's been really neat to be able to hear the stories and encourage the leaders of these parachurch ministries, or maybe the church ministries that are leading these ministries, and saying, hey, let's take a time and step back and reflect. What has the Lord taught you? How have you grown? And there are key areas where we reflect when it comes to vicarious.
As you think about our listeners, our viewers, and as you think about the work you do with pastors, these realities on the ground, what word of encouragement would you give as you think about that? As you think about who's listening, who's watching, what would be a word of exhortation or encouragement that you'd give them, especially as ministry's hard.
Yes.
Church work is hard. The parachurch work is hard. The work you do is hard. Especially as we think about that idea of resilience. What sorts of things come to your mind? Or is there anything in particular that comes to your mind about how you would want to encourage them?
Yes, I think of 2 words: rest and reflection. And so when I talk about resilience, I think of horse training. And so I am not an expert in horsemanship. I have a friend who trains horses, who trains riders who are on horses.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's fascinating to me is when you have a horse who has not been broken, is what they say. And so you have a horse who, for whatever reason, has a traumatic past. And when you are riding, you have to say, hey, please learn how to trust me as the rider on you. And so you have this horse, you're in a round pen, and let's say that horse wants to keep going left. And so as the person you're navigating, you have the bit. And so you have to say, hey, I have the reins here. Let's go to the right. Let's try going to the right. And so you have to dictate, okay, and that horse may have the tendency to keep going left, and they will go in a circle if you let them. But you have to say, hey, let's try over here. Let's tug over here, and we're going to go to the right. And so in our minds, we have to train, okay, naturally and possibly because of the sin of the world, the brokenness, human tendency, we tend to lean to the negative. We tend to look at the disgruntled deacon and think of the negativity. How often it is a wrestle to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to lean into the right. I'm going to take this thought, redirect my mind, and I'm going to redirect this thought and say, let's consider something else. And so for me, when it comes to the pastors, ministers, leaders in the church, take time when we rest to then say, okay, these thoughts, maybe my thoughts towards someone, maybe my thoughts towards a situation, a circumstance. My tendency may be to look at the loss, the negative, what is something that did not happen, the lacking. But how can I redirect that thought? And it's not to negate. We still have to live in a space of loss. Yeah, and we still have to grieve.
And there's a reason why we're leaning left instead of right. There's reasons that shape the actions.
Yes. And when the time is appropriate, we lean in to say, okay, well, let's take a look at what did I grow? What did I learn from this? And who benefited from this? And so it's a lot harder to say what resources did I gain that I didn't have but prior to this event or prior to this circumstance. What tools do I have now that I did not have? What skills? And so there are lots of areas to look at to say, this is the result. This is the blessing, if you will, of the trial, of going through this. And so my encouragement, especially when it comes to church ministry, is saying, okay, let's live in the space of the grief and the loss. In addition to that, let's rein it over and look at what is good. And that's what we talk about in the Christian Life Commission, the CLC. We say at the end of our podcast recording, we always talk about what is good. So to lean in to consider that God wants us to continue focusing, to still mourn when there's a time to. Let's also consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters.
Yes. I thought of Paul in Romans 12, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, right? There's this opportunity to think about what might come unnaturally to us, to do what comes unnaturally to us.
Yes.
Nevertheless, in doing so, we can be formed more into the image and likeness of Christ and transformed. Our minds can be renewed,
Yes.
even in spite of all that's happened. It's
Yes.
amazing to think about. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gallegos, for joining us for the KLC Preaching Podcast. I also want to thank you, our listeners, our viewers. Please hit like or subscribe, both actually, so that we can stay in touch with you better. Thanks again for joining us for the podcast today. We're so grateful you were able to come. And thanks again to Dr. Gallegos for being our guest.
My pleasure.